we're going to talk about The White Ship by H.P. Lovecraft. And in my series of readings, this is the fifth story that Lovecraft published. And in this one is about a person named Basil, who is a lighthouse keeper. His father was a lighthouse keeper, his grandfather was a lighthouse keeper, but no other people are ever mentioned in the real world sense. So I don't know where the mothers were coming from. The grandfather must have lured in a woman at some point, and maybe she only stayed long enough to have the father and then ran off and left the grandfather to care for the father, and then the father managed to lure in a wife and she had the baby and then ran off, abandoning the baby. So now we got Basil here, and Basil apparently never meets anyone at all and just lives in this lighthouse all alone. It's a nice gray lighthouse with sunken, slimy rocks. So their lighthouse is a beautiful, wonderful lighthouse that makes lovely beacon light, but everything else beneath them is slimy and nasty. So they just stay in their lighthouse all alone with their father and grandfather, telling stories about the ships that used to come through, and now there are fewer and fewer ships, so they are even feeling abandoned and useless. So this one remaining lighthouse keeper, Basil, his parents, his fathers, his father and his grandfather, have apparently passed away, and he's the only person in this lighthouse. How is he being fed? We don't know. There is no story about people bringing in food for him to his lighthouse or anything else. It's just him watching the empty ocean, and the ocean starts talking to him and revealing sights of distant ports and of the lands underneath the waters, but he, of course, never goes anywhere because it is his job to keep this lighthouse lit and to keep the few ships that come near safe. And then along starts coming a white ship, and this white ship only comes during a full moon, and it would glide slowly with oarsmen rowing the oars, but it never actually does anything with him, and finally at some point he decides he's going to go off onto this white ship. Now, I took this to mean that he is dying, because he's a lighthouse keeper, and his job is to keep this lighthouse lit, to keep the ship safe, and it seems like he's just abandoning all of his duties that his father and his grandfather all held very dear, and instead he decides he's just going to go off on this white ship and do something new and exciting and abandon the lighthouse, and, who cares about all the ships that would rely on him for their safe passage. So off he goes, and this is based on a different story of old. So the same kind of things that happened to him happened in the other story with, some slight differences. So he's going to a series of cities on this white ship. And the first city that he goes to is the land of Zar, and apparently in this land of Zar it's all sorts of things that were sort of glimpsed by man as being beautiful but never followed up on. And it says in particular it's about young poets who died before the world could learn about what they were all about. So apparently these poets only dreamed in their minds what their poems were like, but never actually wrote them down so anyone could ever possibly read them. And if someone went to Zar, they could never return to their native shore, because the whole point of Zar is that it's a once glimpsed and never recorded or written down thing. So he doesn't seem like too drawn to this Zar world. It's got strange temples and gleaming white roofs, but it's not really that important. He's not going to risk his life and limb to go off and see what's on this Zar world. So they go past the Zar world with its templed terraces, and they go on to the next city, which is Thalarian. And these are mysteries that man has striven in vain to fathom. So there's more temples, weird and ominous roofs, and they say that there are unburied bones and not much else, and grim gray walls. So while this is a place that has things that people can't really understand, it doesn't seem very appealing. So far we've got a place of things that people have glimpsed once and forgotten about, which isn't that really keen. And then a place of things that people can't really understand, which appears to be grim gray walls and weird and ominous things. So he goes right past those two and isn't too worried about them. Oh, and there's demons and mad things in there too, and things that aren't mad. So, neither of these are like super appealing places. He's just going past and saying, oh, there's some interesting things out in the world beyond my lighthouse. And then they get to a third place, Zura, the land of pleasures unattained. So it's got all sorts of faint laughter and lovely groves and radiant arbors. So this is sort of like a world of, I don't know, delightful beauty, But when they get closer, it smells like plague-stricken towns and uncovered cemeteries. So apparently if you have a place that has fun pleasures, they're also nasty smelling. So they decide that, oh, they're not really going to go there. So in that sense, none of these first three cities that they go past are really that appealing. They're all, sort of mildly appealing, but he says, that's not really what I'm looking for to draw me out of my lighthouse world. So and on they go, and finally they get to the harbor of Sonanyl, Sonanyl, the land of fancy. And they get to the shore on a golden bridge of moonbeams. So there's no suffering, there's no death, there's no time, there's no space. They can just hang out there as long as they want to. There's gorgeous temples, castles, fountains. There are happy folk. Now, sorry. And the previous ones, they sort of mentioned that maybe there's folk or maybe there's demons. Here they say there's happy folk, but they don't really even talk about them. There's just a general thought of folk, and you don't get the sense that he even talks to these folk. I mean, he's a solitary lighthouse keeper, so maybe he doesn't find it appealing to talk to folk or even want to talk to folk. He mostly talks about pleasing clumps of bushes, delicate blossoms along the walks, giant domes of uh, cities in a distant harbor, quaint pagodas. And this is a person who, the author that is, was very white-centric, male-centric. So I'm surprised he even mentions pagodas, unless it's just like the pagodas are like distant things that he can admire their beauty without actually having to talk to minorities or other people. But mostly it's castles and cities. And he doesn't even talk about meeting with people or dancing with people or anything else. It's just about being in a pretty place that has lovely things to look at and that he is calm and happy. So maybe, after being in this lighthouse for years and years with no one to talk to, he doesn't care about the no one to talk to part. He just wants to be somewhere where he can walk around and look at different kinds of flowers and see different kinds of temples and pagodas, because he seems to be pretty interested in all these temples and castles. So here he is walking around looking at temples and castles and pagodas, and he decides that he wants to go to this place called Cathuria, which no man hath seen, but somehow they all know that it's this beautiful, fantastic place, even though no one has actually reported what it's like. It's the land of hope. And this sort of makes me think of The Good Place, because, hopefully not to give anyone too many spoilers, but in The Good Place, they end up in heaven, and they realize that if you're in heaven all the time and you get everything that you want and everything is perfect and kind, at some point it's going to get boring because you're going to have, I don't know, played all the Atari games you want to play and painted all the paintings you want to paint. And it just doesn't become interesting anymore if you're doing the same things over and over again. Even if it's something that you like, you want something new and interesting. So that's the kind of mindset I get where we get to this whole land of Cathuria. He's like, all right, I've seen 8 billion pagodas and 2 billion temples and 8,000 flowers, and this is all nice, but I'd like something new after all of this time. I'd like a different kind of music and a different kind of scenery, and I'm not getting it here. So he says, oh, maybe this Cathuria has something new and interesting. And when he describes it, it's really not that different than what we're hearing from this current place, except that he's obsessed with gold. There's going to be golden walls and pavements of gold and other such things. So really he just wants lots of gold everywhere, which I'm sure that they could have in this current place if he really wanted it to be. But this is his vision of the new place, which is going to be different than the old place, which is really the key here, that he's tired of the new place, or the place he's in right now, and he's hoping that this new place will have different interesting scents and sounds and visions and so on for him. The person who sails the white ship's like, well, you don't even know what this new place is going to be like. You're just hoping it's going to be better. It's the place of hope. But you've got this place which is pretty nice. Why don't you stay here in this pretty nice place? And the main character is just like, I've had enough of it. How many decades am I going to live in the exact same place with the exact same looks around it? And it's just not offering me anything new. Now, one could say that he doesn't seem to be trying anything new. Is he trying to, I don't know, play new music or learn new instruments or paint new paintings or anything else? He's just, it sounds like, wandering around and staring at things, and then he's getting tired that he's staring at the same thing all the time. So he decides he's going to go this to the Cathuria place, and he's going to dwell on hope, and it will provide something new to him. He's not going to have to do anything himself to be able to find something new and interesting about his existence. And so off they go, and his pilot keeps saying, this is really a bad idea. He's like, I don't care. I hope that it will be better. And sure enough, as they head through the pillars of the west, suddenly they realize that they are just heading over a waterfall, and they're going to be smashed to pieces, and that hope was all a myth and a dream. And the pilot guy says, well, we were in somewhere quite nice, and we're probably never going to see it again, and we're just going to smash our ship, and that's a shame. So they smash the ship, and as the main character wakes up, he realizes he's at the base of the lighthouse, and sure enough, a ship has crashed because he abandoned the lighthouse, and there was no light to warn the ships of the rocks. So he goes inside the tower, he comes back out again in the morning, and he sees that there's a bird that had been guiding them during some of this trip. So the bird is now dead, and there's a single shattered spar of whiteness greater than that of the wave tips or the mountains of snow. And now the ocean doesn't talk to him anymore, and the white ship has never come from him again. So now he's just stuck, lonely, human in his lighthouse, which hopefully he will not let go out again. And maybe he will actually meet a woman and have a child of his own and be able to have some sort of a life instead of just sitting there all alone waiting for the ocean to fulfill his dreams. So, what do I think of The White Ship? I love Tolkien, and I love fantasy stories and stories about the white ships and going off to distant places and so on. This story to me is saying that he visits a bunch of different cities, that each of them have some things that are sort of tempting about them, but many things that aren't tempting, and then he gets to a place where he thinks it should be perfect, but he realizes it's just the same thing over and over again, and maybe he should realize that he's the one that needs to be seeking out something new and interesting to do with himself instead of expecting the world around him to be providing that kind of information. And he's sitting alone at the lighthouse. He could be reading books. He could be meeting people, because clearly his father and his grandfather were able to meet people to create the next generation. Maybe he could find a wonderful wife, and they could sit there together and write songs and play music together and tell each other stories and have multiple kids instead of just one son having one son and so on, and have multiple kids that are happy and build boats and go out sailing around and exploring the world and taking turns manning the lighthouse thing. So there's lots of things that could be happening. And to me, a lot of what his angst is that he chooses to isolate himself and then chooses to abandon the lighthouse and, abandon his task in the world without finding someone else to even temporarily replace him to watch over things. And then when he gets to this peaceful place, he decides that, oh, this is boring, but he doesn't even know what he's looking for. He just wants something to be new and interesting. Gold. I want lots and lots and lots of gold, as if that's the solution to the universe. So I like the writing of it and the descriptions of the fragrant groves and the green and flowery mountains and so on. But it also seems, I don't know, a bit pedestrian to me compared with some of the other stories up until now, where the descriptions are very traditional. The the gold temples and gold walls and gold ceilings and gold floors, pillars of ruby. It's it's not as intriguing to me as the descriptions of some of his aquatic areas, which are different and unusual and not things that other people have written about in a pretty similar manner. So I enjoy the story. I don't think it's like my favorite story of all time, but it's interesting. And I think that to me, a lot of it is that he needs to take some ownership over his actions, and he needs to start doing things that make him happy instead of just sitting here waiting for a ship to come in and take him somewhere which will be the instigator of all his happiness. So let me know if you have any thoughts on this, if this is like one of your favorite stories ever, or if this is a story that seems to be a parable or a tale that is tale as old as time, song as old as wine. Just people out there looking for the world to make them happy, and you need to find the happiness within you somehow. Right. Good luck, and let me know in your comments.